Hello there. It is a little over 8 o'clock in the morning here in Jakarta, and we are coming to you live with a special program of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its related summits here in the capital. I'm Rahmat Idris.
And I'm Siska Becker. Rahmat, today is finally the day, the opening ceremony of the 43rd ASEAN Summit right here in Jakarta. We are broadcasting live from the majestic stage right here in the Bung Karno Auditorium in TVRI World to bring you all the action from the last final gathering of ASEAN state leaders gathering here in Jakarta, the culmination of all the intricate diplomacy work that has been weaved by Indonesia's chairmanship.
It has been intricate indeed, Siska, very well put there. And this is indeed the culminations of a series of meetings that have been taken place throughout the year under Indonesia's chairmanships in 2023 for ASEAN, addressing some of the most contingent, pertinent matters that has been on the table for years in the region. And we get to see today how it unfolds, how our leaders will come together on the table to come up and to find solutions, common ground to address all of these issues.
Yes, a number of key issues will be discussed by the state leaders from digital transformation, sustainability, food security, health infrastructure, and of course, trade facilitation, all in the hopes to find a cohesive framework for all the ASEAN state leaders to reach the epicentrum of growth, the goal of ASEAN this year.
That's right. And also herding the shepherds of some of the biggest elephants in the room, Siska.
Might I say the elephant not in the room.
Because Myanmar has been also such a thorn on the side of our chairmanship this year. And this has also garnered attention globally on how ASEAN and Indonesia as the leader this year will help the discussions to address these issues in terms of the Myanmar civil strife in the country that has been going on for years, and as was mentioned by our Minister of Foreign Affairs, that it is a grave challenge for ASEAN, and it hasn't been easy. Hundreds upon hundreds of meetings taking place, and that was one of the elephants I mentioned. We're also talking about the South China Seas and the growing disputes and tensions with China and ASEAN member states in terms of overlapping borders and territory and the rivalries of big economies globally.
A lot of issues, a lot of grounds to cover. Let's begin with our special report for the 43rd ASEAN Summit.
This is our special report. All right, Siska, starting last night though, we've seen arrivals of some of the most esteemed delegates, particularly heads of delegations here in the capital, Jakarta. They have made their way through the red carpets this morning for the opening ceremony, and last night they were welcomed with such merriness, with traditional performances and in person by our ministers.
Oh, this would be one of the most exciting moments for this morning's coverage for the 43rd ASEAN Summit. Let's see how all those state leaders are arriving right now at the venue. Okay, so we're still waiting for a live feed from the venue.
That's right.
To see how the proceedings are going on right now. We also have TVRI's reporter actually standing by there at the venue
to
tell us exactly what's happening.
We cannot wait to hear the latest updates, the developments currently going on at the Jakarta Convention Center, which
Yes.
is just across the road from where we are right now
I
at the
know.
auditorium.
Oh, it's completely buzzing around here right now.
And Jakarta has completely transformed, particularly around the area
Yeah.
of the summit, where the security perimeter is tight, security measures have been put in place, and it's all to ensure a smooth sailing ordeal for this summit.
Of course, all ministries are working extra hard to ensure everything will be smooth sailing
Yeah.
across the proceedings of the 43rd ASEAN Summit. Not just security, but transportation. It's also putting all the extra
Yeah.
work to make sure that people can travel easily
Yeah.
and smoothly.
And all the electric vehicles that are needed to showcase how we are moving towards green economy, green industry, and green transportation.
Yes.
In the meantime, Siska, as you said, we will bring you live pictures from the venue of the summit later on once we have them. And in the meantime, we are very honored to have a very special guest to join us for the conversation today here in the studio to dig deep into and to dissect into what's going to transpire at the summit.
Yes, indeed. It's a big stage, and Rahmat and I cannot fill it just by
We
ourselves.
need more people.
So it is our honor to invite onto the stage our first guest, Shafia Muhibat, Deputy Executive Director for Research of CSIS.
All right, and that is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Miss Fifi,
Hello, hi,
looking
good
lovely.
morning.
Good
Good
morning
morning,
to you,
good to see
Jakarta
you.
time.
Good to see you both as well.
You were with us yesterday for the
Yes.
pre-summit, for the
Yes.
Foreign Ministers meeting, and we cannot wait to hear what you have to say for the summit today. We look forward to pick your brain.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for having me again today.
Thank you very much and very good morning to you. And our next guest also joining us on the stage today, he is the Senior International Lecturer from Parahyangan Catholic University, Professor Julius Purwadi Hermawan. Prof, do join us here front and center on the
Good morning,
stage.
Prof.
Good morning.
Good morning indeed.
It is a big stage. It takes a little bit of time.
It's called
Good.
runway practice. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining
Yes.
us this morning. We cannot wait to hear your insight as well on the summit. A lot of important issues to address. And not only the four of us here on stage, joining us virtually, another esteemed guest who will be speaking with us throughout the program today. He was also with us at the Foreign Ministers Summit a few months ago, senior diplomat and former Indonesian ambassador to the United States. His Excellency Dino Pati Jalal. Mr. Dino, thank you very much for joining us from wherever you are virtually. We look forward to speaking to you very, very soon. Siska.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Again, we are very excited to begin our conversation. So maybe we shall begin sitting down so we can
That's
start
right.
discussions.
Let's take our seats and get the show going. Please. Sis.
Please. Let's make ourselves comfortable. We are doing a
Indeed.
marathon this morning.
That's right.
Discussions.
Yeah, we're bringing our audience all the nooks and crannies around the summits, what's going to be on the table, and what, most importantly, what the outcome is going to be. In the meantime, let's start our program with the arrival from last night, Siska.
Yes, indeed. We're going to see how busy the people were at the airport in Cengkareng to
Yeah.
welcome the arrival of the state leaders of ASEAN. Let's have a look.
Arriving in the capital, the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste.
And here we have His Excellency Mark Brown, Prime Minister of the Cook Islands. So not only world leaders, state leaders were arriving at the airport last night, Rahmat, but to get a better comprehensive understanding of the myriad of issues that are plaguing the region right now.
Yeah.
ASEAN Summit also welcomed a lot of leaders from world organizations.
That's right. And they are also an important dialogue partners to ASEAN who provide insights and comprehensive overview of how ASEAN should navigate through all of these issues and matters that we need to deal with on the summit's table. And in the meantime, we have the pictures for you on the arrivals of the organizations and invitees to the ASEAN Summit here in Jakarta. Take a look.
So once again, welcome to all the state leaders from ASEAN member countries.
Right.
All of us are very excited indeed to see what they come up this time in the final gathering of ASEAN leaders in Indonesia's chairmanship. In the meantime, we'll say hello again to our guests. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Let's start our discussions. There's so many things to talk about, so many issues to cover, and so many intricacies in the diplomacy work that is, been issues for Indonesia at this final stretch of its chairmanship of ASEAN. So maybe I can first ask Mbak Vivi, Mbak Syafia Muhibat, what do you think now at the end of Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship? Do you think Indonesia has left a good enough legacy as ASEAN chairman? And do you think all the problems that Indonesia put forth at the beginning of its chairmanship was resolved at the end?
Sure. As tempting it is to sort of like measure whether one's chairmanship is a success or not, I think it's a very difficult thing to measure. And it really depends on a lot of things. What do you mean by success?
Okay.
I mean, as a chair, where one is supposed to host 2 summits, hundreds of meetings, I think Indonesia has been successful in terms of, convening all of these different meetings, making sure all of the issues that are planned at the beginning of the year are discussed throughout these hundreds of meetings. So in that part, that has been successful. But in another, if you look at it from a different perspective, I mean, ASEAN, all of these meetings, they have to deal with a lot of very difficult issues. I think at the beginning you mentioned some of the most difficult issues has been like managing the Myanmar crisis, South China Sea, managing tensions due to the great power rivalry. And with that, I do think there are still a lot of homeworks that still needs to be done, but we still have the next few days to see what the leaders actually come up with. And I think looking at from the results from the foreign ministers meeting yesterday, if you look at the media coverage afterwards, a lot of attention was indeed put on the Myanmar issue, which I think sort of like shadowed a lot of other issues that were discussed as well.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's also normal because I think globally a lot of attention is put on Myanmar and how ASEAN is handling the crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
Professor Julius, what's your take on the same matter? How do you see our chairmanship this year from your overall perspective and analysis? Have we made a significant mark and shown our true leaderships in the bloc?
Yes, but I have to agree with Ibu Vivi that Indonesia is making a great effort to be a good host of the summit. And more important than that, of course, Indonesia always try to lay the foundation for the future. So remember in 2011, when we became the chair of ASEAN, we were very serious on preparing the establishment of ASEAN Economic Community.
Yeah,
and
EAC.
remember that the vision 2015. And then Indonesia also laid the foundation for 2025, which is in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
People-centered community, which means ASEAN will facilitate the connection between people, interaction with people. So there will be a sense of ASEAN feeling among the peoples, brotherhood, sisterness, something like that. So there's some things. And this year, I think Indonesia will look at 2045,
Okay.
which is of course very important. 20 years from now, ASEAN will be very different. And Indonesia is good in preparing for that.
Right.
Okay.
Very well said there,
Yeah,
Professor.
very interesting. So one of the highlight of the many agendas that will happen throughout the 3-day of the summit is the ASEAN and Indo-Pacific Summit, which is the flagship event initiated by the Foreign Ministry of Indonesia. Ibu Retno Marsudi have said this will be an important platform to finally discuss all of the issues that's been plaguing the Indo-Pacific region. But at the same time, we see that there are many absentees in this meeting that was supposed to have a great voice and great input, like US President Joe Biden, President Xi Jinping, and President Putin will not be attending this meeting. How do you think this meeting will be still effective with all these world leaders being absent, Mbak Vivi?
Okay, the Indo-Pacific Forum itself is an addition to the regular summit, right? And it's part of Indonesia's effort, a continuation of Indonesia's initiative with the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, which was issued 2019, 4 years ago already. At the time, Indonesia's initiative was applauded as something that is sort of like a breakthrough, that ASEAN would have a document specifically on Indo-Pacific. But then, afterwards, there were a lot of criticisms with regards to the implementation of the document, saying that it's only an outlook, no strategy, no follow-up, and so on. So I think this year, it's Indonesia's initiative is based on the idea that it's time to actually implement some of the issues already covered in the document. But absolutely right. I mean, the implementation of the document doesn't necessarily mean that there is already a formulation of clear strategies on how Indonesia or ASEAN can actually play a bigger role in the Indo-Pacific. And looking at some of the agenda of the forum, it's still very much an early stage of the implementation, I would say. Doesn't mean that it won't be fruitful. We still have to wait and see what is discussed tomorrow in the next few days. Is it start tomorrow or today?
It's starting today.
It's starting
so we'll
today.
look forward to seeing the arrival at the red carpet today
Sure.
of the Excellency's delegates. And the opening ceremony too. Hopefully we'll get the live pictures very, very soon here to our studio. In the meantime, I'd like to greet yet another guest joining us for the conversations. As I mentioned earlier, senior diplomat and former Indonesian ambassador to the United States. It's always a pleasure to have him in the program. His Excellency Dino Pati Jalal. Mr. Dino, a very good morning to Jakarta time. Are you in Jakarta or somewhere in Italy or Lake Como? That's what you told us like a few months ago. Thank you for joining us this morning.
I'm in Jakarta. I'm still in Jakarta. I'll leave tomorrow. Yeah.
You leave tomorrow, so we wish you safe travels. In the meantime, thank you very much, Mr. Dino, for joining us in this conversation. This is such a big day. All eyes are in Jakarta. This is the first day of the summit. and we are also going through domestically a political year. And how do you see the political atmosphere, not only in Indonesia, but in the region of ASEAN and probably beyond, ahead of the 43rd ASEAN Summit here in Jakarta? Will it be conducive enough to produce fruitful result, declarations of any sorts or deliverables at the end of the summit?
We hope so. I think everything's looking good so far. We'll see what happens on the Myanmar issue. But I think one of the more significant results will be around the ASEAN Concord 2, the vision of, ASEAN Concord 4, the vision to have what ASEAN will look like after 2025 to 2045. Yeah, so it gives some kind of a blueprint, a vision of how ASEAN envision itself in the coming 2 decades. But on top of that, I think the significance of the summit is that it demonstrates to the world that ASEAN centrality is here to stay. We expect a lot of world leaders and regional organizations coming in to discuss issues of common concern. And I think these discussions will be quite interesting given the evolving geopolitical landscapes that are still unfolding today.
All right, Pak Dino, let me ask you the question I already asked Mbak Vivi and Prof. Julius earlier. I want to get your perspective on how do you see Indonesia's chairmanship of ASEAN now that we are at the final mile of the journey? How do you think Indonesia has managed differences in ASEAN member countries for the common good of the regional grouping?
Well, this is a rotational leadership, it's a process whereby ASEAN countries take turns to become a chairman. So it's a question really of managing the process that have been set in place and adding value to it. Right. So I think that this is what we're seeing now. I expect there'll be some contentions during the East Asia Summit because the division between Russia and the US and the West still very much there. So you can expect the same conversations or the same tussles, right? The relationship between the US and China is still deeply competitive. But there are efforts to manage it better. We saw the visit by Secretary Blinken to China this year, and also a visit by U.S. Commerce Secretary Raimondo, and so on. So there are efforts to manage the relationship, the U.S.-China relationships better, right? And I think. The political and diplomatic atmosphere is relatively manageable in this summit in Jakarta.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dino. Great insights there. I'd like to go over again to Professor Julius. Professor, just to piggyback on what I asked earlier to Mr. Dino, how do you observe the current political atmosphere in ASEAN and also beyond it globally, probably? Because we know in the initial stage of ASEAN in the 60s, it all started due to political tensions in the region. And what's the relevance of ASEAN now in the global communities to address all of these pertinent matters?
Definitely, it's still relevant. Since 1967, there are so many things happening already, political issues, and today still the issue on Myanmar, and we still not settled yet. And recently, we are facing very difficult claim from China on the new political map, official map, which raised criticism from Philippines, Vietnam, and also Russia even. That's in the regions. Conflictual, bilateral conflict between Thailand and Cambodia maybe, coming up at any time. It's already settled anyway, gitu, but the issue of Vihara still there. So China Sea, of course, difficult issues for ASEAN leaders at the moment, and of course I agree with Pak Dino, Pak Dubes Dino, that the geopolitical tensions, conflict between Russia and Ukraine create the serious impact on ASEAN economically and also politically.
All right. Now, Mbak Vivi, if you don't mind, I want to go back to something you said earlier about yesterday's AMM meeting.
Sure.
When you said the Myanmar crisis kind of overshadowed all the other issues that were discussed. Can you tell me what are those other issues and which are the ones that you wish would have been discussed more and put more into highlight?
Sure. I think one of the very interesting and very good initiative, I think Pak Dino mentioned it earlier, was that it's not actually at the foreign ministers meeting, but the meeting afterwards, the ASEAN Coordinating Council, which resulted in a statement that the ministers agreed to have the ASEAN Concord 4 to be adopted by the leaders today, and I think it's a very big breakthrough as well. Something that was not very much predicted by a lot of people, even though it's been long in the discussion that we discussed this yesterday, Mas Idris. I think a lot of criticisms towards ASEAN, the slowness of ASEAN bureaucracy, the slowness of ASEAN decision making.
The reform of it.
Exactly. So this is, with the Concord 4, some of these issues will be tackled.
Okay.
But let's not get too optimistic that ASEAN will change overnight. But I do think it's a process to make ASEAN more effective and hopefully even more relevant. Back to your question about relevance, to make ASEAN even more relevant in the current geopolitical environment.
Are we optimistic, Ms. Fifi, that today all the esteemed heads of delegates will put their signs, will become a signatory of the ASEAN Concord 4? And what does it truly entail for the progress of ASEAN in the future?
It's basically we're not expecting for ASEAN the workings, the structure, the format to change overnight, right?
Yeah.
I think it's the beginning of a process to make even ASEAN better and more relevant. And I do think that all ASEAN member states are on board with the idea that ASEAN should be more relevant. There are, however, and I have to underline this, differences in the way to get there. So the end is basically agreed upon that ASEAN should be better, should be reformed. But how do we get there? Which part do we change? And some of the details might
all
be
the negotiations that will be involved in the process.
Yeah. So that's why I said
intricate.
The Concord itself, if it is adopted, then it will be the beginning of an ongoing process, because it will be part of the ASEAN Vision 2025, as mentioned by Professor earlier, which I think is planned for the next 20 years, so 2025 until 2045. Yes, so it's a long process.
Okay, but how would this Concord be affecting the Myanmar crisis? How do we go about handling this crisis?
Yeah, exactly. So crisis like Myanmar is one of the very evident proof that ASEAN's decision making and bureaucracy is very slow.
Okay.
Because you can't make really bold initiatives without going through a very long process. So I'm not too sure the exact details of what's going to be in the Concord. I think we'll find out in today and the next day as well.
Okay.
But I think it's a way to change some of that, so that when crisis as big as Myanmar occurs, there are better processes through which ASEAN can actually make a contribution.
So to have a better mechanism.
Exactly.
To tackle issues such as this.
So crisis management, I think, is part of the Concord as well. Decision-making process is also another thing that is covered by the new Concord.
Right.
Okay.
I'd like to go over again to Mr. Dino, who joined us virtually. Mr. Dino, if you can give us your insights on what our governments, as chair this year, and many ASEAN meetings have made progress in terms of addressing the Myanmar conflict, given the endless brutality of the military regime in the country. Mr. Dino.
Well, Thank you. First, we really have to send a clear signal that ASEAN will always pay attention to Myanmar because look, nobody else will if and they're counting on us. Yeah, so we should be on the front line on issues relating to Myanmar, especially because in Southeast Asia now, it is in Myanmar where you see violence and death and bloody conflicts, armed conflict, right, and political crisis, humanitarian sufferings. You have refugees, tens of thousands, I think 10,000 refugees now in Thailand and so on, right? So this is an anomaly in ASEAN, which is supposed to be an oasis of peace and stability. And ASEAN should always be seized with the question of Myanmar. So that's one. Secondly, I think, look, Indonesia should play its cards better. I think the last row between Indonesia and Thailand was not helpful. I think we should learn from the lessons of how Ali Alatas helped resolve the Cambodian conflict in the 80s, where every member of ASEAN contributed in their own way to the resolution of the conflict. Indonesia has special access, and we use that to the full. But also, look, Singapore had some access, the Thai had some access and some contributions, even the Australians also, and so on and so on. So if Indonesia is not having access to the junta leader, to Aung San Suu Kyi, to the foreign minister, but the Thais are having access, then we use that. There's no place for, I don't know, ego or things like that. Yeah, the key to success is to be consistent and to use all our assets on all the channels to move the needle towards a political solution. And I do think that if the Thais have some access to the leadership and the stakeholders in Myanmar, it is consistent with the 5-point consensus as well, because the 5-point consensus says that ASEAN should talk to the stakeholders. It doesn't say it has to be here or there or by whom. Yeah, but I think that is the one thing that we need to improve in terms of how we address the Myanmar issue.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Dino, for that somber reminder that at the heart of the Myanmar crisis is the people of Myanmar who have been suffering for so long.
Yeah.
Prof. Julius, I would like to give you a chance as well to get your perspective. Is there a chance to resolve the Myanmar crisis? Now we're nearing the end of Indonesia's chairmanship. It's very unlikely that we'll finally get a solution to finally end the conflict there. Will it be just passed on to the next chair?
Laos now. It's Laos homework next.
Yeah. It's going to be like that?
Well, it has been 2 years and there is not much change in Myanmar. Even after the ASEAN leaders issue 5 points consensus, which saw ASEAN way in handling the situations. Dialogue, I think that's most important than anything. A special envoy to be sent, but unfortunately rely on who is the chairman. Okay. Indonesia is the chairman, and the special envoy is from Indonesia, of course. And that will be maybe one of the issues when Indonesia when the chairman of Indonesia ended, then the next chairman, of course, will do something. Could be continue the legacy of Indonesia, if Indonesia did something. But unfortunately, full-time or permanent office of special envoy may be the idea, which means the approach that will be used by the special envoy will not only depend on who is the chair of the ASEAN, but of course something discussed. I don't know whether there is another options, another means. In Labuan Bajo, in the chairman statement, clearly ASEAN leaders highlight the importance of resolution should be led by Myanmar people, owned by Myanmar people, which means we could not use other possible options. Of course, subtle diplomacy can be done that. I'm thinking about putting sanctions, economic sanctions, which will be very hard, of course. But this is unfortunately ASEAN way.
Not, yeah.
Yeah.
Not
It's
yet.
not in line with the policy
Yeah.
of ASEAN.
Yeah.
You mentioned briefly there, Professor, on a special envoy, which is just something that we've had for a while from on behalf of ASEAN, and also humanitarian aids coming to the country as well, which so far have been met with resistance, have been met with gun-blazing attacks, for lack of a better word. And our Minister has also mentioned about the establishments of AHA Center, the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance in the country, which is a challenge, a grave challenge for ASEAN at the moment. So, and upon hundreds and hundreds, 110 if I'm not mistaken, meetings that have been taken place under Indonesia's chairmanship this year, do you think that we've made significant progress in terms of having talks with all of these oppositions in Myanmar?
So there's opportunity to have talk with the leaders and also the opposition leaders, then there's a progress. But unfortunately, the door for the dialogue with both parties, not only junta militer, but also the opposition leader, should be within the framework of the mediation process. I guess last 2 years, only succeed to talk to the junta militer, the chair of the ASEAN, the special envoy, and it failed to talk to the Aung San Suu Kyi as the leader of the opposition.
Who is now in jail.
Who is now in jail.
Yeah.
It's quite unfortunate. So looking at the resistance, you mentioned about the resistance from the Myanmar, it's quite pity actually.
Yeah.
While there is no other option to putting harder pressure on Myanmar,
Yeah.
then we have just like to wait and see while
It seems that we're going to have to continue scratching our heads on
I
this
know.
Myanmar issue.
Even here on the stage, we are exasperated just talking
Yeah.
about the Myanmar crisis. We can only imagine what the state leaders are about to say about this ongoing crisis.
Hopefully something truly beneficial for both
Yeah.
parties can be manifested, can be translated into actions from the summit here in Jakarta. In the meantime, we'll take a short break. Do stay with us, Ms. Fifi and also Mr. Yulis and Mr. Dino on the other side of our conversations. We'll be right back in just a few minutes. Stay right here on TVR Our World.
Dingin banget di sini.
Welcome back to our special report for the 43rd ASEAN Summit right here in Jakarta, which was preceded yesterday by the Foreign Affairs Minister of ASEAN. I believe Rahmat have more on that.
I have just a report on that, Siska. Foreign Affairs Minister of ASEAN again attended the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting yesterday ahead of the summit today, but representatives from Myanmar confirmed their non-attendance at the meeting. On Monday's AMM, Myanmar has confirmed not sending any of its representatives to the meeting. But especially for the 43rd ASEAN Summit scheduled on the 5th to the 7th of September, Myanmar will be represented by its ambassador for ASEAN that was assigned before the country's military coup. This was said by Director General of ASEAN Cooperations, Sidarto R. Suryodipuro, at a press conference in Jakarta on Friday. Meantime, Foreign Affairs Minister Retno Marsudi, in her opening remarks at the ASEAN ministerial meeting, said that conflict in Myanmar is still an issue that must be settled. Minister Retno said that Indonesia, as chairman of ASEAN, has been working extra hard to make sure ASEAN would unite in handling the issue relating to Myanmar.
Can move forward or not entirely depend on about to start our conversation. So may I kindly read the meeting room. Terima kasih teman-teman media.
More on the Myanmar crisis. Coordinating Minister for Political, Legal and Security Affairs said Myanmar issue may hamper implementation of ASEAN Political Security Community Council or ASCP blueprint for 2025.
In his latest remarks, Political Affairs Minister Mahfud MD said in Jakarta, ASEAN was challenged with not only global problem, but with Myanmar issue, which may hamper the implementation of ASCPC Blueprint 2025. Minister Mahfud MD said the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war should act as a warning system for ASEAN to resolve the Myanmar conflict. Minister Mahfud MD also urged ASEAN member countries to boost cooperation in the borderline and increase exchange of information on implementation of mandates adopted from Declaration on Combating Trafficking in Persons or TIP made in May this year.
And now the ASEAN way, right over left-hand side. Excellencies. Thank you, Excellencies, and please kindly proceed to your seat.
In the meantime, Foreign Affairs Minister of ASEAN countries are set to review the 5 points of consensus or 5PC in resolving the Myanmar conflict.
Foreign Affairs Minister Retno Marsudi at the opening of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Jakarta on Monday said a comprehensive review on implementation of 5PC or 5 points of consensus was taken at the behest of heads of states of ASEAN member countries. Minister Retno said results of the review will be presented at the 43rd ASEAN Summit. It is understood that there has not been any much progress on the implementation of 5PC. Myanmar is still marred by massive daily violence. In July this year, Human Rights Watch reported a massive human rights violence done by Myanmar military almost every day. In previous year, Myanmar was not invited to attend the ASEAN Summit this time around. Minister Retno said at the opening of ASEAN Minister meeting that the region was facing a difficult time and urged it should not disrupt their massive efforts at the 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta.
All right, you are still watching our special program here on TVR World, airing live from the capital Jakarta, Indonesia, for the 43rd ASEAN Summit taking place here in the capital, alongside its other related summits for the next 3 days.
Yes, indeed. But now we're going to continue our dialogue with our guests who are here in the studio with us, Mbak Fifi, Pak Julius, and also joining us virtually, we have Pak Dino Patijalal. Pak Dino, you're still here with us?
I'm here.
Okay, great.
Right.
Pak Dino, let's continue our conversation about one of the most talked about topics in the 43rd ASEAN Summit, which is not the elephant in the room, but the elephant not in the room.
Yeah.
Of course, we're talking about President Joe Biden not being here at Indonesia for the 43rd ASEAN Summit. I just want to get your perspective. How do you think his absence will affect the summit here happening in Jakarta, Pak?
Yeah, thank you. But first, I just want to add a little bit to the earlier conversation about Myanmar, to what Pak Julio said. And saya mau ngomongin, that it's true that I think we need to rethink the office of the special envoy for Myanmar, because you cannot resolve an issue by having a rotational manager every year, right? It just doesn't work like that. There is no mechanism like that anywhere in the world, right? I remember when we resolved the Cambodian conflict, Alatas was just focused on it the whole year until it was resolved, right? So I think ASEAN needs to rethink how they're gonna want to do this special envoy thing. You can't have it change every year, right? You got to have somebody permanent, focus on the job, do the job quietly, despite the rotational change of chairmanship of ASEAN, and give him or her the full resources that he or she will need to do this job, because the job is hard enough as it is. Yeah, so that's one. But on your question, of course, for ASEAN, it's long been said that showing up is very important, right? And this is why, especially for this year for Indonesia, this is Jokowi's last ASEAN summit, right? And this is the year where Indonesia is hosting and chairing the ASEAN summit. So it's particularly important for Indonesia, and I'm sure that Indonesia, must be a little disappointed that President Biden is not showing up, especially because there's now a U.S.-ASEAN comprehensive and strategic partnership. Yeah, the relationship has been elevated to a high level. But that being said, it must be said that despite the fact that it's the vice president who will be attending the ASEAN summit, the Asia summit, and the substance is there. The relationship between ASEAN and US is rich. The US investment in the region is about $450 billion. The US is the largest investor in ASEAN. There's like 6,200 American companies operating in Southeast Asia, and there is a lot of functional programs, sectoral cooperation on women, on health, on energy, and climate, and so on. So the substance of the relationship is rich. But yes, I mean, I'm disappointed too that President Biden is here, but it's not here. But the show moves on. The show goes on. They'll be reading the same script anyways. President Biden or Vice President Kamala Harris, they'll be reading the same script anyways. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
However, Mr. Dino, we have received confirmations from the White House that President Joe Biden will be attending, as a matter of fact, the G20 summit in Japan right after a couple of days after a summit here in Jakarta, and then interestingly afterwards a visit to Vietnam, which will also be accompanied by Vice President Kamala Harris after her visit here in Jakarta, which bears the questions of a lowered commitment of the U.S. towards the ASEAN and the region of Indo-Pacific, what most analysts have said about this. How should we really read into this, Mr. Dino, in your perspective?
Yeah, well, that's a tricky one. I was just in Vietnam last week, in fact, and they're all quite excited to receive President Biden's visit, and they're supposed to upgrade their relationship also to a comprehensive strategic partnership. But again, I think the best way to interpret it is that for the U.S., Vietnam is the flavor of the month, right? The fact that President Biden is making a special bilateral trip to Vietnam. Of course, he's expected to go to G20 in India. I would be surprised if he wasn't going, but he is going, right? And I've been trying to find out what is the real reason why President Biden has decided not to go to the ASEAN summit in Indonesia. I'm not getting any clear answer or any useful insights on that.
All right. Thank you, Pak Dino. Now I'm going to go to Mbak Vivi. I would love to ask you also about this big question about the absence of President Joe Biden. Now, as we know, actually, the U.S. have stated numerous times how they support ASEAN centrality. They think ASEAN is their key partner in the Indo-Pacific region. But now, with President Joe Biden being absent, people are saying U.S. is just talking the talk but not walking the walk. So the action does not match the words. Now, how do you think this will affect VP Harris when she comes down here to represent U.S. best interests, especially in relation to the quote-unquote rivalry that is going on between global powers to assert their influence here, especially in the ASEAN region?
Sure. I mean, it's a difficult situation in a way. I mean, substantively, it doesn't really have that big of an impact.
Okay.
Which
part doesn't have an impact?
The Biden
The
not coming.
absence.
Yeah, the
Okay.
absence of Biden in Jakarta, because most of the issues are dealt at the ministerial level anyway.
Okay.
So the leaders meet and they're supposed to adopt a written already a statement. But it's also true that in ASEAN, the workings of ASEAN, attendance is part of the norm,
Yes,
right? If
yeah.
you're not here, then you basically don't put any attention to the region. So that's a difficult part here. But I think we also need to be realistic in a way that you can't expect a leader of a major power to be in Southeast Asia every single year, because ASEAN summits occur every single year.
Yeah.
So it's a hard one to manage. It is really bad for the optics of Biden not being here.
Yeah.
But in terms of substantive matter, that it really doesn't have any effect,
Okay.
as Pak Dino said. I mean,
To the outcome of the
exactly,
deliberation.
exactly, yeah.
Okay.
You share with us your perspective on this,
Yeah.
Mr. Julius, because I'd like to quote what our former Foreign Affairs Minister said, Mr. Martin Natalegawa, just earlier on the question of the absence of Joe
Okay.
Biden, because he said it's not as much about his absence per se, but it's about what it says about his absence, meaning that ASEAN has made less and less mark or less and less prominence on the global stage.
Yeah.
Do you concur with this?
Well, referring to your point that he will visit India to attend the G20
The
summit.
G20, yeah.
So the impression is G20, of course, is much more important than ASEAN.
Yeah.
That's the first things. So kind of recognitions. G20, the most important forum now globally. But then look at the ASEAN, less important. So it's kind of recognitions, Pak Dino and also Bu Vivi. Look, ASEAN is at the center of global growth now, player in the region, something like that, and should get recognitions from a big player in the world like United States. But well, it's a pity, of course. President Joe Biden could not come by himself, while you said he will visit India for that. But again, the outcome already discussed, already deliberated, setting the milestone for not only for 2 years but also 20 years to come.
Right.
No Biden, no cry lah.
But should be also very pleased with the presence of Vice President Kamala Harris.
Of course.
She is of an Asian heritage as well. I mean, she can relate to us here in Indonesia, and hopefully we'll have her in the studio.
And it'll be exciting to have the first female vice president of the United
Exactly.
States visiting Indonesia. Now, back to Pak Dino, who's still with us virtually. Pak Dino, I would love to get your insights. I don't know if you have any behind-the-scenes stories about this, because there are some rumors swirling around that the reason the U.S. is giving Indonesia and ASEAN the cold shoulder is because of Indonesia's closer proximity to China and also in particular to BRICS. This was marked by President Joko Widodo's attendance at the BRICS meeting earlier in South Africa.
Yeah.
What do you think of this, Pak Dino?
We're not a member of BRICS yet, yeah. And the ones that have been admitted to BRICS, for example, among others, Emirates, right, is a close, ally or friend of the United States, and also Saudi Arabia and so on. And I think the fact that we have close relationship with China, right, and that the president went to South Africa and so on, I don't think that affects such decision, because the U.S. knows if they push Indonesia into a corner or scold Indonesia for making friends with A or B, they're going to lose Indonesia, right? So we do have a great deal of leverage. I think the major powers now, they're all actually competing to have closer relations with Indonesia. I mean, you see this with the U.S., you see this with China, Japan, EU, even Russia, right? I think it's just a rumor. I think the U.S. is a lot smarter than that. Whatever factor plays into the decision of Biden not coming to Indonesia, certainly not that, because they know if they start doing that, then they will be left behind. I think, I mean, this is why I tell my American friends, the region moves really fast. They're always coming up with initiatives. It can be TPP, it can be RCEP, and so on. If you don't catch up, we're not waiting for you. We're gonna leave you behind, right? And I think the Biden administration understands that, and that's why they came up with IPEF, right? Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, and Indonesia has been very supportive of that. And Indonesia really wants the U.S. to be strongly engaged in the region, in the Indo-Pacific, and also within the ASEAN region. But it's something, as Marty has said, this is something that has to be earned all the time. Relationships, centrality, and so on.
Right. Mr. Dino, still on the matter of who's coming or not coming to the ASEAN summit, other notable absences here at the summit in Jakarta are the leader of another powerhouse economy, China, Xi Jinping, has confirmed to be represented by the premier, Li Chang, and also Vladimir Putin is going to be absent as well. What's your take on this?
For China, it has been common practice because in China there is a division of labor, and it has been done for a long time, which is President Xi Jinping does the bilateral stuff, right? So, but the premier does the ASEAN summit. So if there's an ASEAN summit, the leader that comes is always the Chinese premier. So that has been the conventional practice. So we accept that, and we were totally fine with it. Yeah, I think President Putin is a different case. As you know, in South Africa, he took part virtually. Yeah, he did. He wasn't there physically during the BRICS meeting. I think there are some legal issues at hand, right? And I think it's more or less. Again, I don't know. You're going to have to ask the Russian side why President Putin is not here physically.
All right, Pak Dino, we understand that you have a packed schedule ahead of you today. We truly appreciate you being here with us. So maybe one last question before we let you go, Pak Dino. What would be your hopes and wishes for the 43rd ASEAN Summit happening right here? The opening ceremony happens today in Jakarta. Please, Pak Dino.
Well, I mean, the world is in flux, right? This is we have a lot of anxieties about the state of the world, and we are very fortunate that ASEAN is a place where you see peace, stability, and cooperation. We may see rivalries and conflict and tension elsewhere, but we hope when they come to our region, which is our home, and we are the driver of events here, we hope that the behavior is slightly differently. They will play by our terms, right? And they will play by our rules. I mean, all of them have signed on to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, right? So my hope is that the world will look at ASEAN summits here this year, and we'll see a region of stability, peace, and cooperation. And I think that's something that should give hope to everybody, but especially to the citizens of ASEAN, something they should be proud of.
Well, apparently that is all the time that we have with you, senior diplomat and former Indonesian ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Dino Patijalal. We thank you so much for your insights on our program, Mr. Ambassador, and we wish you safe travels to Italy, to Lake Como, and we look forward to seeing all the pictures on your timeline. Thank you again, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Pak Dino.
Bye, Sophia. Bye, Professor Yuyus.
All right, very great to have Pak Dino's clear-headed
Always a
analysis
pleasure, yeah.
of all the issues here in the ASEAN. We'll continue our conversation, of course, with Mbak Fifi and Pak Julius. But first, let's take a short break.
Yeah.
We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Well, thank you for still joining us on the special program today here on TVR Our World as we come to you live with the coverage of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its related summits here in the capital, Jakarta.
Yes, indeed, Rahmat. And as part of our ongoing coverage, we have TVRI World's reporter Shafira Junior right there at the venue at Jakarta Convention Center to tell us a little bit more about what is actually going on there as we're approaching the opening ceremony. Shafira, can you hear us?
Hello, Rahmat and Siska. Now I'm here reporting live from the Media Center of the 43rd ASEAN Summit 2023. Here, Rahmat and Siska, there are around 20,500 journalists registered to do the news coverage on the ASEAN Summit. And now behind me, you can see there are a lot of journalists working, creating news to be reported soon. Because we are here, Siska and Rahmat, all the journalists here. Now we are waiting for the arrival of ASEAN heads of states, and the ASEAN heads of states are expected to arrive shortly. And now in front of the media center, Rahmat and Siska, there are a lot of presidential security forces and also security that is strengthening the security in the area around the media center of the 43rd ASEAN Summit. And also the 43rd ASEAN Summit is expected to be a momentum to combat hoaxes and disinformation. And here in the 43rd ASEAN Summit Media Center, we have the ASEAN newsroom here that every journalist can check the new releases and also what is going on and what is concluded in another side events and another series of meetings in ASEAN Summit 2023. And now here the journalists, some of the journalists are still having their breakfast, and there are also some journalists outside. They're now on their cameras waiting for the heads of states of ASEAN member states to arrive shortly. And also there are a lot of people outside waiting for the delegates to come. And Rahmat and Siska, here at the media center, the Ministry of Communication and Informatics emphasized that the news and every press releases here are credibly checked and is far away from hoaxes. So it is expected that the ASEAN Summit newsroom will combat misinformation or hoaxes, fake news, and disinformation that is becoming more widespread as what is currently faced by the world, and also with the increasing use of the internet in the Southeast Asian region. Rahmat and Siska.
Right. Safira, if you can hear us here in the studio, from the initial agenda of the summit today that we have received a couple of days ago, it states that the arrival of delegates, including the head delegates, is scheduled to start at 9 a.m. This is a little over 9, as a matter of fact, 9:30 a.m. Have you received word, Safira, on the delay of the arrival or even the delay of the start of the opening ceremony, or will it be on time at 10 a.m. for the opening ceremony?
Well, it's not, we still don't have that information, Rahmat, because as you can see behind me, we have a huge screen that will allow us to get the information of the arrival of the ASEAN heads of state. And for now, there is still no information, but as far as I see, we can.
Shafira,
Okay.
sorry for cutting you off, but actually we are receiving live feed
Rahmat,
right now.
now at the entrance gate of the media center, we can see that there are a lot of security forces. So yeah, so it can be seen that can be seen that the delegates are here.
Okay.
So we can see that the
Okay, thank you
Hats
very
off
much,
state.
Shafira. Thank you very much for the comprehensive reports. We'll get in touch with you very soon as we've now received live pictures from the red carpet of the arrival at Jakarta Convention Center of the delegates for the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its related summits here in Jakarta. There you have it. President Joko Widodo alongside First Lady of Indonesia, Iriana Joko Widodo, welcoming the arrival of the fifth head of states here for the summit.
So a 30-minute delay, but we are very glad indeed to
That's right.
finally have the world leaders from ASEAN member countries finally arriving here at the venue.
Heads of governments, yeah.
Okay.
And if you look at the setting of the arrival spots there, it's very lively, very vibrant.
I know.
A tropical jungle, if I may say.
Looks
Just
beautiful.
to welcome heads of delegates into the venue today, Siska.
Yes, Jakarta Convention Center has definitely been transformed into a different venue altogether as we now welcome the heads of delegates for the 43rd ASEAN Summit. We can now hear the music.
The salute
being
of
played.
honor as well.
Yes.
And this is the Prime Minister of Cambodia, Hun Sen, arriving at the red carpet and ready to be greeted in person by President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo. With the traditions of red carpet, it's always quite a walk, Siska,
I know.
as they exit the car. And then it's quite a runway they had to go through with all of these decorating flags symbolizing the unity of ASEAN at the pre-function area of the Jakarta Convention Center.
So far, I've been silently admiring the wardrobe of the First Ladies.
Always something to observe, we believe, representing local culture and traditions of their respective countries, Siska. And the region of ASEAN is always known for one of the most vibrant regions in the world in terms of arts and culture, ethnics, languages, truly represented by the bloc.
Really lovely to see our First Lady, Ibu Iriana Joko Widodo, wearing that vibrant blue for her outfit today as she welcomes all the heads of delegates.
Yeah, and matching the backdrop as well, where you see the live screen behind the President and the First Lady. And the next part is for them to be redirected by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, Retno Marsudi, we believe, to the holding room. And now we see first they sign the guest book marking their presence at the summit.
Also an important tradition in ASEAN Summit.
That's right. Another car pulling the driveway now.
We see the flag of Thailand.
Yeah. And we've received confirmation, Siska, that the Prime Minister of Thailand will be absent at the summit. So we look forward as to who will represent him on his behalf, most probably the Foreign Affairs Minister.
Okay. Yeah, we heard that because he's new to the position, he's still adjusting.
That's right.
To his new role and
that's right.
Therefore unable to attend the ASEAN Summit.
A newly elected Prime Minister in the monarch of Thailand. And as a matter of fact, there's been quite a few elections in the region. Thailand just recently around our foreign affairs ministers, and then Singapore just last week elected a new president. But of course, here at the deliberation, Singapore will be represented by the Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong later on. We wait for his arrival. And no spouse there inside, Siska.
Yes.
There we have it, head of delegates of Thailand.
There you go. We just had confirmation that the image, the visuals that you see there at the background of President Joko Widodo and First Lady Irina Widodo is actually our new capital, Nusantara in East Kalimantan. You can see the silhouette of the building that will be the presidential palace in Ikn Nusantara.
I was thinking if that is the current condition or the previous conditions with all of the jungles and the greeneries around it and the forest. It's very lush. Tropical forest though, and it is of course one of the main attractions of Indonesia in the current time, attracting investments into the new capital. The biggest projects in the tenure of the President Joko Widodo.
But you know, I heard, Rahmat, that was actually part of the urban planning to make the new capital to have a lot of original forest.
And we believe now pulling out the driveway is the President of the Philippines, Bongbong Marcos.
Yes, not his first visit to Indonesia.
Yeah, he was also there at the summit in Labuan Bajo alongside with the First Lady of the Philippines. And this time, though, he is wearing something very formal, the full suit, because previously he would be wearing the bagong traditional attire of the Philippines, which was exquisite. But I think it's the dress code at this time for the summit, and all the related summits in Jakarta to wear formal attire.
And it would be more appropriate to wear the Filipino traditional attire at Labuan Bajo, considering the climate there.
Exactly. That was quite humid. And
it was actually quite smart of him.
Yeah, that was such a balmy day in Labuan Bajo. But here, quite temperate here in Jakarta.
Of course.
And just beautiful backdrop there. So, Miss Fifi, I'd like to get your take. Arrival is always something very nice to see, but something we can also nitpick on, just the reflections of warmth and joyous welcome from our president. So how do you see, what's your first observations of the arrival today here at the summit in Jakarta?
Well, that's always the thing about ASEAN, right? I mean, if you recall back in history, 1960s, 1970s, ASEAN was basically built upon the personal relations between the leaders. So, for example, the Indonesian president can just be on the phone with the Singaporean PM, for example.
Yes. As you were speaking, the Singaporean PM, I think, just pulled up now by the driveway to walk the red carpet to be greeted by President Joko Widodo.
His Excellency Lee Hsien Loong, alongside First Lady of Singapore. I should not say First Lady, really should go to the Madam of the President. There you have it. Moments away from being greeted by President Joko Widodo. And Singapore, as I mentioned earlier, has just welcomed a new president just last week of an Indian descent, truly marking harmony and diversity in ASEAN, in Singapore as well. Professor, Mr. Julius, how would you describe the relations of, very briefly, Indonesia and Singapore, particularly with the newly elected president now in Singapore?
I think we will be very optimistic looking at the new leader from Singapore, and then looking at our history back to 1960s. Quite optimistic. Don't forget, Singapore is one of the largest trading partner for Indonesia. And
the most prosperous nation in ASEAN that we aspire to.
Yeah, that's right.
Indeed, the relationship between Indonesia and Singapore has always been amicable, and now we are welcoming the head of delegate of Malaysia, our neighbor.
Yeah, His Excellency Anwar Ibrahim. We expect exiting the car. And this will be his second visit to Indonesia after choosing Indonesia as his first destinations upon being elected as Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Yeah.
There you have it. Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, walking down the red carpet on his way to greet President Joko Widodo.
And what do you think of the relationship between Indonesia and Malaysia right now, Mbak Fifi? Now that we have Mr. Anwar Ibrahim, who've always been a dear friend of Indonesia, actually, even during those tumultuous years of his career back in the day, and now he's here as Prime Minister.
Indonesia-Malaysia bilateral relations will always continue to be interesting. I mean, it's two close neighbors. People call it serumpun and all.
Yeah.
Always ups and downs in the
Plagued
relations.
with migrant workers
Exactly,
issues.
exactly.
Man, that's always a
yeah.
thorn,
So it's always going to be one of Indonesia's most important bilateral relations, and something that the government will always put priority on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We share a lot of similarities as well in terms of arts and cultures, the
course.
Malay
Yeah.
language and also
The
tradition.
Malay culture, yeah.
Which can be both a plus and a minus. It can be a source of tension as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Fighting for kebaya, for example, and
Yeah.
batik.
Yeah.
That was quite some moments there in the history of the relations between our countries.
I just
So
wanna
who do
know-
you have next there, Siska?
I'm not sure. I cannot see
We
the
can
flag.
see the flag there
but
covered
yeah.
by one of the
But I just want to note
security
how I
personnel.
admire Ibu Retno's energy. I mean, look at her serving
way-
as usher.
Yeah, the way she greets, her
Yeah.
body gestures, her firm stance. And this was, another head of delegates
Yeah.
arriving here at the red carpet from
In
Vietnam.
Vietnam. Right.
Another warm greeting from President Joko Widodo to the head of delegates of Vietnam, here arriving in Jakarta for the 43rd summit of ASEAN.
Now, the relationship between Indonesia and Vietnam, especially today, as Indonesia is finishing off its ASEAN chairmanship, can be also seen as quite tricky because of Vietnam's problem with the South China Sea dispute. And of course, Vietnam would need Indonesia's support to help its claim. But how do you see this matter,
Yes, it's
Julius?
problematic, of course, but we have to look at the potential of Vietnam.
Okay.
Since joining 1996 or 1997, it's growing very fast.
Yeah.
Should be looked at as a potential partner, even though it's
And when it
also
was
the
shaking
rival.
hand, the delegates of Vietnam saying, "We're sorry Biden's not coming here, but coming to our country instead." Another country's pulling in, Siska.
Yes, this is
Here,
Timor-Leste.
Timor-Leste,
Our
Prime
youngest
Minister.
brother in the
Prime
ASEAN
Minister
family.
Nana Gusmao is here. After he takes back his words just earlier before the Prime Minister saying that it's not time to join ASEAN, but it's been revised by the President of Timor-Leste that it is time indeed
Yes.
for Timor-Leste to join ASEAN. It is high time for them to partner up with ASEAN in order to alleviate some of the most crucial problems that Timor-Leste is currently having, and also in order to truly develop it as one of the more important regions and nations, the youngest democracy also in the world, Timor-Leste.
Yeah, and an encouraging development between the relationship of Indonesia and Timor-Leste, which we know was marked by some dark chapters in the past.
Exactly. Over 20 years of bilateral relations of Indonesia and Timor-Leste, and this is a joyous time for the nations as they are now an observatory member, or rather member in principle of ASEAN, and hopefully by next year embarking upon full membership of ASEAN. We talked about this yesterday, Ms. Fifi, how Prime Minister Nana Gusmao backtracked on what he said about the membership of ASEAN, saying that, it is time indeed for us to join ASEAN. Your words again from yesterday, if you can flash back a little bit.
Yes, I mean, like, of course, I mean, from Indonesia's point of view, it's important that Timor-Leste joins together with ASEAN as part of the region. But it's still not, it's still going to be, it's still in process. It's not something that's going to happen at this summit.
Instantly too, yeah.
Yeah, but definitely something in the process, and Indonesia is still promoting the effort.
Okay, we have the
Head of
delegates of the European Union now walking the red carpet, joining the other state leaders and heads of delegates who have already been inside after being greeted by President Joko Widodo and have their picture taken. European Union, of course, a very important trading partner
Exactly.
for Indonesia. A lot of cooperation, especially in green economy, in sustainability.
Yeah. For a moment there, I was expecting Ursula von der Leyen exiting the car, but apparently not. The president himself is here to greet President Joko Widodo. Mr. Julius, what can we learn as ASEAN, a bloc in the region, from another bloc in Europe, and that is European Union? Something that, lesson learned.
Of course, many lessons learned that we can take from European Unions, how to promote regional integrations in economic field, for instance. They have already the currency, single currency.
Common
for
currency,
instance.
something
We are still struggling on that.
Yeah.
I think that's also part of the discussion. Maybe we can talk to European
Okay.
Union.
I think the solution to that, we are trying to adapt the new technology of QR method, so everybody can just scan and pay and no need to exchange
The money.
the money. Yeah. So just scan to buy es potong in Singapore, for instance, Pak Julius. Very easy.
No need to think about how to convert rupiah to Singaporean dollars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It will boost businesses, it will boost tourism across the region as well. And head of delegates of Bangladesh has now arrived as well.
So a partner country arriving to join the summit.
And he will definitely be attending all the way to the East Asia Summit on the final day of a series of summit here in the capital Jakarta, where we believe it is one of the biggest summits of all the related summits aside of the 43rd Summit of ASEAN, where leaders around the globe, Australia, China, the United States, even Russia will be there.
Canada.
Canada as well, to President Justin Trudeau has been confirmed to attend. So we're going to be seeing some great congregations of delegates for the EAS, or East Asia Summit, here in Jakarta. However, there's been questions, Siska, and also our guest at the program, as to why Jakarta plays the hosts, because the G20 summit was in Bali, so there was expectations for the sort of summit to take place somewhere in Indonesia other than the capital. Other destinations that our tourism ministry is trying to promote and push further, but apparently it's the capital for the summit this year.
I believe the decision was based on infrastructure.
That's right.
I think the president wanted actually to have the summit in other world-class tourist destinations like Lake Toba, for instance. But it was the matter of infrastructure that, of course, we wanted the summit to happen in a place where all the world leaders and heads of delegates
can have the exposure of some of the least popular destinations, but something to discover for these delegates. And now we have Sultan of Brunei representing Brunei Darussalam, the head of delegates. Sultan Hassan Al Bolkiah walking down the red carpet. He is usually accompanied by his son. That is behind him.
I think that is his son, the Crown Prince.
The Prince, I was going to say Fresh Prince of Brunei Darussalam.
Different Prince.
But not, it's the Crown Prince. There you have it. The Sultan.
I know for a fact a lot of women in social media in Indonesia are very much looking forward to brush shoulders with the Crown Prince of Brunei Darussalam. Is it safe to say that he is the richest person joining the summit?
Very safe to say, Siska.
Okay, we just had confirmation it's actually not the Crown Prince, it's the Prince.
It's the Prince of Brunei Darussalam. There you have it. Sultan Hassan Al Bolkiah and the Prince of Brunei Darussalam alongside President Joko Widodo and First Lady of Indonesia.
Can I make a comment on
Yes.
Please
why
do, Ms.
it's in Jakarta?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
There is a very strong factor to that because the ASEAN Secretariat is in Jakarta.
In Jakarta.
Okay.
And more Indonesia is promoting that Jakarta is the capital of ASEAN. And they're slowly moving the process that most, if not all, ASEAN meetings in the future should be in the ASEAN Secretariat.
Okay.
Which is in Jakarta.
Which is in Jakarta.
All
So
right.
when we do move to Nusantara, Jakarta will be more and more symbolically be the capital of
ASEAN.
Southeast Asia.
I see.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Jakarta is going to be the next Brussels for European
Yeah,
Union.
something like that.
It already is.
ASEAN
Yeah.
headquarters.
Yeah.
It already
The
is. Yeah,
Secretariat
Yeah,
being
yeah, yeah.
here.
with the ASEC here.
Okay.
I see your point. Thank you very much for adding that note, Ms. Fifi. And that's something that, okay, I guess we are still expecting more live pictures from the arrival at Jakarta Convention Center, as we expect and more and more delegates will make their way into the meeting room, the
Yes.
summit room at the Jakarta Convention Center here in the capital, Jakarta. Siska.
Okay. I think while we wait, we continue our discussion with our guests here in the studio, Mbak Fifi and Pak Lius. After seeing the arrival of the state leaders and heads of delegates joining President Joko Widodo for the 43rd ASEAN Summit, we can feel that the atmosphere, the vibe is friendly, is welcoming. But how do you think the discussion will be once they get inside? Because there are many pressing issues that needs to be resolved. There are a lot of ongoing conflicts that we need to find the solutions fast. What do you think would be the number one issue that will be firstly discussed by the heads of delegates, first and foremost? Pak Julius.
Yeah, first we have to recognize that the process within ASEAN start from the lowest levels like senior official meetings, and then we have deputy meetings.
All the
and also
working
on
group
the-
meetings that have
So all
preceded it.
sensitive issues should be settled first at that kind of level.
Okay.
And also yesterday we have ministerial meetings, the level of ministerial livings, where all sensitive issues should be there.
Okay.
And then in the summit, what President Jokowi as a chair to do is invite the president from other countries, the prime minister, to speak, to intervene within few minutes, 3 minutes, or maybe less. Gitu.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity for the leaders to intervene, to raise the concern issues. Something like Myanmar, geopolitical tension, something like that. Gitu.
Okay.
And then I don't expect there will be debate. Or respond
It will be formal
directly
presentations
to
of the
formal,
results.
kind of
Yeah.
formal presentations. Yeah.
Ms. Fifi, let's look back a little bit in retrospect to our G20 presidency, because there were a lot of working groups who could not achieve joint communiques, deliverables on papers from all of these hundreds upon hundreds of working groups across the years. And similarly, this year, I had a first-hand account of the energy ministers meeting in Bali just last week, where they failed to achieve joint declarations. There was heated discussions between
Okay.
ASEAN Secretariat, Singapore, and Russia
Okay.
on the words they use of zero emissions or reduced emissions. So that was quite heated
Okay.
debates, resulting into only chair's note, not a joint declarations. And we believe that was also echoed by many other ministerial level working groups across ASEAN this year. So from all of these results, what can we hope for this summit of the leaders here in Jakarta? Because surprisingly, in Bali, we had a lot of failed joint communiques, but we achieved a joint declarations at the summit under President Joko Widodo. Will it be the same? Will it similar be the case for this
Yeah,
year's
I mean,
ASEAN?
well, G20 and ASEAN are two different types of multilateral
Different beasts,
organizations.
you're saying.
Exactly, exactly. So the workings are different. So I don't think there is any concern that there would not be a joint result here in Jakarta, different to the G20 summit in Bali. I think the actual document is already being prepared, at the ministerial level yesterday. So today they just have to adopt what has been agreed upon yesterday. And since we haven't heard any sort of like real quarrel or tension resulting from the AMM yesterday, I don't think we're going to have a problem with that. And also to keep in mind that the signatories of the ASEAN summit would be the 10 ASEAN member countries. We might have an issue with the East Asia summit later on, where US, China, Russia is part of the East Asia summit. So we might have more of a dispute there, but for the ASEAN summit itself, I'm not expecting any real problems. Yeah.
Okay. Would the South China Sea dispute be one of the sources of ongoing debates between the world leaders to find a consensus? Although we have the code of conduct, and of course it'll be one of the basis of foundations of discussions among the state leaders. But what do you think of this, Mbak Fifi?
Okay, we don't have a code of conduct yet. I mean, it's something
progress.
very long in the process. But at the ASEAN level, I'm not expecting any initiatives at the joint communique or any other outcome of the summit. It's going to be mentioned there as part. If you look at the joint communique at the AMM in July, it's listed as one of the, I'm not sure the wording is, basically the hotspots in the region. It mentions, for example, the Taiwan Straits, the Korean Peninsula, and the South China Sea. It's always mentioned there, but don't expect any real initiative on how to actually manage the disputes. At the East Asia Summit, it might be more of an issue to discuss, but not as big as an issue still related to Russia and the conflict in Ukraine, which I think will also still be in contention at the East Asia Summit.
Well, as a matter of fact, Ms. Fifi, what I mentioned where the failed joint communique was achieved was actually the preparations for the East Asia Summit in Bali, not for the 43rd ASEAN Summit.
And that's where,
a lot of other big economies are taking part in. That's where they failed to achieve. They come up with the agenda to be adopted for the high-level meeting for the summit. We believe on the final day of the related summits here in Jakarta. And Mr. Julius, just to echo what Siska has said, South China Sea has always been one of the main sources of elevated tensions here in the regions, where we see overlapping borders and territories. And you also mentioned at the beginning where China has produced a new map that has been contested by the Philippines, by Vietnam, by Indonesia. So where do we go from here? Because Code of Conduct has taken years and years to negotiate with no lights at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I have to say that there is a dilemma behind why the negotiation on South China Sea takes long time until, I don't know, when we'll come up with the conclusion of the Code of Conduct. First, of course, we need China economically. China is about our largest trading partner for ASEAN members. That's one thing. And the good thing from China is using economic means to exercise influence in Southeast Asia. But when talking about the political issues like South China Sea, there's something else. And ASEAN has been very careful in handling the situations because ASEAN would like to get two benefits from China. Economic things, of course, definitely. But at the same time, settlement of the dispute on South China Sea, it would take long time in the future.
All right, so you think our economic dependence on China hinder the way to resolving the issue?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But unfortunately, we cannot use the instrument of politics to negotiate with China. Something like, well, let's settle our dispute on South China Sea first, and then cooperate on economic field. We cannot do that.
In the matter of the South China Sea, it is actually really complicated because there are so many countries that have been embroiled in these disputes, and we've heard about issues where the Philippines, instead of asking for ASEAN for support to their claim, they go directly to the US. The same is said about Vietnam. That's why President Biden is supposedly visiting Vietnam next after G20. How do you see this for the issue of ASEAN centrality?
Oh,
Pak Julius?
Well, yes, China would like to have bilateral approach when settling the South China Sea. It's like joint exploration with Philippines.
Yeah.
And then the same with Vietnam and also Malaysia on that. And then get benefit from the oil or the mineral resources in South China Sea. Then it will be very difficult for ASEAN as an organization to come up with unified standpoints in response to the China. Yes, centrality, I think that's a big issue as well, whether really can be a driver in the seat, in driving seat.
Yeah.
We can direct what we want from China and also from United States.
Yeah.
Okay. Because Mbak Fifi, you also mentioned earlier about the slow process of negotiations among ASEAN, the very slow bureaucracy. Could this be the moment where we swallow that bitter pill and acknowledge that, especially with the fact that President Joe Biden is not attending ASEAN as well, that maybe like US clearly has deemed ASEAN as not being the platform where issues can be resolved. Would this be a fair assessment, or is this too harsh?
absolutely. I think I've swallowed that pill long ago and been very critical about ASEAN and the diminishing, I would have to say, diminishing relevance of ASEAN in today's geopolitical environment. ASEAN was created in the 1960s and it was successful to face the challenges then, you know, 70s, 1980s, 1990s. It was considered most successful, one of the most successful regional organizations in the world. But today's challenges are completely different with the rising tension, the strategic distrust between US and China, the creation of new minilateralisms, the AUKUS, the Quad, and so on. It really, you know, puts ASEAN to test. You know, is it still relevant? And I think that's the big question. And once most of our dialogue partners see that there's this diminishing relevance of ASEAN, you can't blame them for looking at other alternatives there. That's why they create these new minilateralisms, the Quad, AUKUS, and so on, because they want to find alternatives that can be more relevant in facing the challenges of the current geopolitical situation.
Right. On that note, we'll go over again to the Jakarta Convention Center, where we expect all heads of delegations have made their arrival at the venue. And in line with the traditions, oh, there they are, walking down the red carpets, we believe, from the holding room earlier towards the meeting venue of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its related summit here in Jakarta. You have there the Speaker of House of Representatives of Indonesia, Puan Maharani, also accompanying one of the delegates.
I must say the inside of the Jakarta Convention Center is looking sparkling new. It looks beautiful.
Let us rise and stand ready to extend our warmest welcome as the ASEAN leaders and spouses make their entrance.
2 hours. Today, a little over
ASEAN
3 hours.
anthem.
Raise our flag, high, high, embrace the pride in our hearts. ASEAN, we are bonded as one, looking out to the world. For peace our goal from the very start, and prosperity to last. We dare to dream, we dare to share together for ASEAN. We dare to dream, we dare to share, for it's the way of ASEAN.
Please be seated. Your Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits. Let us immerse ourselves in this wonderful display of ASEAN unity, reminding us that together we stand as the epicentrum of growth.
Welcome to the hub for sustainable and inclusive growth of ASEAN. The dynamic region, taking each step with purpose and drive, working hand in hand, constantly evolving, keep moving and accelerating.
Epicentrum of growth. In the heart of the East, across East Asia's land, as ASEAN we stand. Listen to the message in a world divided. We are stronger together. Hands held tight, we'll shine a light. Hand in hand, we'll reach new heights. Let us foster our own global epicentrum of growth. As ASEAN we born, our hearts beat as one. We've just begun. Let's spread our wings and fly. We're going in here, oh, can't you see? We'll bring our destiny in symphony. Together we conquer the mountain. Set aside our fears and touch the sky. Epicentrum of growth.
Let's offer our cheerful hellos. Brunei. Selamat pagi. Cambodia. Arom Swaste. Lao People's Democratic Republic. Sebani Tansao. Malaysia. Apa kabar? Myanmar.
Ni kau lah.
Philippines.
Kamusta?
Singapore. Hello. Thailand.
Sawadikap.
Vietnam. Xin chào. Timor-Leste. Hola. Indonesia. Halo. Selamat datang di Indonesia.
Hands held tight, we'll shine a light. Hand in hand, we'll reach new heights. Let us foster our own global epicentrum of growth. As ASEAN reborn.
Welcome to Indonesia. our unity shines. We celebrate cultures in every line. From mountains to oceans, under skies so blue, come dance with us as we welcome you.
Our hearts beat, made us one. We've just begun. Let's spread our wings and fly. We're going in here, oh, can't you see? Can't you see? We'll create our destiny in symphony. Together we conquer the mountain. Set aside our fears and touch the sky. Ooh. Our hearts beat, made us one. We've just begun. Let's spread our wings and fly. We're going in here, oh, can't you see? Can't you see? Can't you see? We'll create our destiny in symphony. Together we conquer the mountain. Set aside our fears and touch the sky. Our hearts beat us one. Just begun. Let's spread our wings and fly. We're going in here, oh, can't you see? Can't you see? We'll create our destiny in symphony. Together we conquer the mountain. Set aside our fears and touch the sky. Epicentrum of growth. Epicentrum of growth. Epicentrum of growth. Epicentrum of growth. Epicentrum of
Your Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you enjoyed the special performance from the champion of the World Choir Games 2023, Gita Bhumi Voices, whose members radiate the bright future of our young talents. Let the performance inspire us to continue our commitment to ASEAN unity, standing as the epicentrum of growth. Now, allow us to invite the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Your Excellency, Mr. Joko Widodo, to come to the stage to convey the opening remarks.
Sri Baginda,
His Majesty,
Yang Mulia,
Excellencies,
para pemimpin ASEAN,
leaders,
para pemimpin negara-negara mitra, yang saya hormati Ketua dan Pimpinan Lembaga Tinggi Negara, hadirin Ibu Bapak yang saya hormati. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Selamat datang di Jakarta pada acara KTT ke-43 ASEAN. Saya dan seluruh rakyat Indonesia sangat senang menyambut kehadiran keluarga besar ASEAN. Saya yakin tidak hanya Indonesia, tapi seluruh negara anggota ASEAN memiliki rasa kebanggaan yang sama, memiliki rasa kecintaan yang sama terhadap keluarga yang kita beri nama ASEAN. Memang, akhir-akhir ini saya sering mendengar pertanyaan publik terkait ASEAN, yaitu apakah ASEAN akan terpecah dan tidak bisa bersatu? Apakah kapal ASEAN mampu terus melaju? Yang mulia, pada momentum yang baik ini, sebagai anggota keluarga dan sebagai ketua ASEAN, saya ingin menegaskan bahwa kesatuan ASEAN sampai dengan saat ini masih terpelihara dengan baik. Kesatuan jangan diartikan tidak ada perbedaan pendapat. Sebagai negara yang memiliki beragam suku, budaya, bahasa, dan agama, bagi Indonesia, kesatuan itu adalah sebuah harmoni dalam perbedaan,
the differences,
termasuk di dalamnya
including
perbedaan
differences
pendapat.
in opinion.
Karena perbedaan pendapat
Because
justru
differences in opinion,
menyuburkan
in fact,
demokrasi.
nurtures democracy.
Justru menunjukkan
It shows
bahwa
that
kita sebagai keluarga
we as a family
memiliki kedudukan
are
yang setara.
on equal footing.
Kesetaraan ini yang saya
This
lihat
equality I
sudah
observe
menjadi barang langka
has
di
become a
dunia.
rare thing in the world.
Banyak ketidakadilan
Rampant
dan konflik
injustice
terjadi
and conflict
akibat
continue to
tidak
occur
adanya
due to the
kesetaraan.
absence of equality.
Tapi di
But
ASEAN
in ASEAN,
berbeda.
things are different.
Kesetaraan
Equality,
justru
in fact,
menjadi value utama
is the primary
yang
value
kita hormati
that we respect
dan
and
kita junjung
uphold
bersama
together
dalam bingkai
in the framework of
persatuan
unity
dan
and
kebersamaan,
togetherness,
sehingga kapal
so that
besar
the
ASEAN
big ship of
dapat
ASEAN
terus
can
melaju.
continue to sail.
Kita sadar
We are aware
dunia
that
memang
not everything
sedang tidak
is
baik-baik saja.
well with the world.
Tantangan masa
Future
depan semakin
challenges
berat
are becoming increasingly
dan
difficult
mengakibatkan
and
perebutan pengaruh
causing
oleh
a struggle of
kekuatan besar.
influence between major powers. Nevertheless,
ASEAN sudah sepakat
ASEAN has agreed
untuk tidak
to
menjadi
reject
proksi
being a
bagi
proxy
kekuatan
for any
manapun,
power,
untuk
to
bekerja
work
sama
together
dengan
with
siapapun
everyone
bagi
for
perdamaian dan
peace
kemakmuran.
and prosperity.
Jangan
Do
jadikan
not
kapal
turn
kami
our ship
ASEAN
ASEAN
sebagai arena
into an arena
rivalitas yang
for
saling
rivalries
menghancurkan.
that cause mutual
Tapi
destruction.
jadikanlah
Instead,
kapal ASEAN
transform
ini
this ASEAN ship
sebagai ladang
as a
untuk
field
menumbuhkan
to
kerjasama,
nurture cooperation,
untuk
to
menciptakan
achieve
kemakmuran,
prosperity,
menciptakan
to achieve
stabilitas,
stability,
menciptakan
and to achieve
perdamaian
peace.
yang tidak hanya
Not only
bagi kawasan,
for
tapi juga
our
bagi
region, but also
dunia.
for the world.
Yang mulia,
Excellencies,
samudra dunia terlalu
the
luas
world's
untuk
oceans are
dilayari
too
seorang
wide to
diri.
be sailed alone.
Dalam perjalanan
In our
kita
journey,
akan ada
there will be
kapal-kapal
other ships,
lainnya. Kapal-kapal
the ships
mitra
of ASEAN
ASEAN.
partners.
Mari kita bersama
Let us work together
mewujudkan
to
kerjasama yang setara
cooperate
dan
on an equal
saling
footing
menguntungkan.
and benefit one another,
Untuk berlayar
to sail
bersama
together
menuju
towards
epicentrum
the
of
epicentrum of growth.
Dan
And
dengan mengucap
by saying
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim,
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim,
KTT
I hereby
ke-43
declare the 43rd
dan
ASEAN
KTT
Summit
lainnya
and other related
dengan
summits
ini
to
resmi
be officially
saya nyatakan
opened.
dibuka. Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Wassalamualaikum
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We kindly ask you to remain on the stage. Your Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before proceeding further into the ceremony, we would like to kindly invite all ASEAN leaders to come to the stage for a group photo session. me to count in 3, 2, 1. Now in the ASEAN way. In 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Your Majesty and Your Excellencies. We kindly request President Joko Widodo and all leaders to return to your respected seats. Let us also take this special moment to recognize and celebrate the remarkable accomplishments which shape the ASEAN community. The ASEAN Prize 2022 and 2023 awarding ceremony. The recipient of the ASEAN Prize 2023, Mrs. Nguyen Thi Thiet Minh, a prominent advocate for women's socio-economic empowerment from Vietnam. Her unwavering commitment has marked a significant contribution towards the ASEAN economic community building. Let us also announce the recipient of the ASEAN Prize 2022, Mr. Haji Muhammad Iqbal Fakhri bin Haji Damit, a youth advocate and community leader from Brunei Darussalam who promotes an inclusive community-based development, contributing to a more resilient ASEAN community. We would proudly invite Mrs. Nguyen Thi Thiet Minh and Mr. Haji Muhammad Iqbal Fakhri bin Haji Damit to the stage. Allow us to invite the Secretary General of ASEAN, Your Excellency Dr. Kao Kim Un, to the stage. We also kindly request Your Excellency President Joko Widodo to join on stage for the ASEAN Prize presentation ceremony. Let us count down for the photo session. In 3, 2, 1. While His Excellencies President Joko Widodo and Dr. Kao Kim Un unkindly requested to remain on the stage, we cordially ask the ASEAN Prize recipients to return to their seats. We now invite the Minister of Environment and Forestry of the Republic of Indonesia, Your Excellency Mrs. Siti Nurbaya, to proceed to the stage. Your Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with great delight and enthusiasm, let us witness the soft launching of the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Transboundary Haze Pollution Control. We kindly request Your Excellency President Joko Widodo to proceed with the soft launching of the ACC-THPC. Allow us to count in 3, 2, 1. Let us give a big round of applause for the newly launched center. We have witnessed the soft launching of the center, which will enhance ASEAN's commitment in managing the impact of land and forest fires, particularly haze pollution. Let us forge a path towards a haze-free future and a more sustainable ASEAN. Your Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the opening ceremony of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and related summits 2023. Today, not only have we come together to celebrate the achievements of our union, but we also forged new paths towards progress and unity. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the departure of the leaders. Once again, thank you for your unwavering support. Let us continue to work hand in hand, building a stronger and more vibrant ASEAN as the epicentrum of growth. Have a pleasant day, and we wish you a productive meeting on the 43rd ASEAN Summit.
Summit and its related summits here in Jakarta commenced by the President himself, President of Indonesia, His Excellency Joko Widodo. Siska, with some of the most notable remarks at the opening of the ceremony.
It was actually quite interesting to note that one of the first sentences that the president used, he used the word family a lot. He mentioned ASEAN as a big family, and as in a family, not everyone always agrees on everything. Unity does not mean conformity. You can have different opinions, but still you can be harmonious and you can still strive for the same goal together. I think that was a great statement made by the president.
Yeah, cannot said it any better than Siska. I'd like to get the takes from our guests today, Fifi and also Mr. Julius. What are your biggest takeaways from the opening remarks of our president? Mr. Julius, may you start first?
My impression will be the celebration of unity with the very, very cheerful performance. Indeed, that's the first thing. But that's a good point when you're highlighting the family. Unity means family will always conserve, maintain the unity among the members. But President Jokowi also highlight the difference is also possible. And having difference can make a progress. That's the takeaway from me, myself at least. Of course, optimism. Optimism to have this summit should be successful. I don't know why the launching of the ASEAN Coordinating Center is at the first, gitu.
Yeah.
Usually at the end, gitu. And then part of the achievement that Indonesia already achieved during the chairmanship. You know.
Yeah, I agree, Pak Julius. The rundown of the event was quite unorthodox and different from previous summits. What do you make of it, Mbak Fifi?
Not sure. I mean, if you want me to comment on the rundown, but I'm sure the organizers would have specific reasons to that. But back to Pak Jokowi's statement earlier, indeed, I mean, one of the criticisms that ASEAN has been on the receiving end lately is that because of the disunity among the members. Some of the issues, relations with China, the geopolitical rivalry between US and China has been one of the main points of disunity in ASEAN. Some countries are leaning towards China, some countries are leaning towards the US, some countries like Indonesia are trying really hard to be neutral. So it's been the lack of unity among the ASEAN member states have been one of the biggest problems recently.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, Fifi and also Mr. Julius, that was, if not the second, the third points conveyed by Mr. President, was that he admitted there is divisiveness in ASEAN at the moment, but it doesn't mean that ASEAN is not intact. We are, as a matter of fact, still very much intact, he said. And also noting the fact that there is a problem of inequality that has been the major cause to rampant violence and rampant injustice across the region. Is he, in a way, it is a subtle mention to the Myanmar and the tension on the ocean right now, Fifi?
I don't think that was some he was mentioning specifically about Myanmar, but when he talked about inequality, I think President Jokowi was referring to the current geopolitical situation where there are conflicts in major parts of the world. But he was putting out there that ASEAN is different. Everyone's treated with he said equal footing in his statement. Which for me is very idealistic. I don't really see ASEAN as completely having an equal footing in all of its members. But I think he was emphasizing that ASEAN is different to the different regions in the world where we have an association that caters to the differences and different interests of the members.
Yeah. All right. It's interesting to note that, like Pak Dino said earlier when he was still with us, joining us virtually, that this is President Joko Widodo's last ASEAN summit as president of Indonesia. So this would be, in a way, part of his legacy. How do you think the world, history will see President Joko Widodo in his last moment as president of Indonesia and also chair of ASEAN?
Sure. I think ASEAN chairmanship is only one of the many memories that the world will have of Joko Widodo and his foreign policy or Indonesia's international global aspirations is just one of the many. But I think, if you recall early on in Joko Widodo's term as president, he was very much criticized as lacking sort of like foreign policy activeness or ambitions. He was mostly looking to domestic issues. But some of the big international events or international endeavors that Indonesia has been involved in, so the G20 and now ASEAN, I think has shown that Indonesia does have global aspirations. There are clear limitations, definitely, as we can see. We talked about some of the challenges that Indonesia faces, but I think the aspirations is still there. It's of course there.
Right. I'd like to get both of your opinions on another strong remarks that President said throughout his speech today, was that the fact that ASEAN rejects to be the proxy of any war, of any confrontations, of any power. And meaning that he also acknowledged that there is such thing ongoing in the world right now, and ASEAN doesn't want to be any part of it all. Mr. Julius first, and then Mafi.
Definitely, the message is very clear. Warning for the big powers, global big power like United States and also China, and maybe could also include European Union, which is there. please, here's the region. It has unique, it has centrality role in the world, in the global scenes. And don't use it as the arena where you have to exercise influence or get the support from members of ASEAN. So that's very strong message, I guess. But I'm just wondering whether it's also a sign for country which is developed countries which is not happy with Indonesian like palm oil, something like that, or nickel, something like that. Maybe gitu. But I'm just wondering about that is because that's the concern of our presidency.
We've been battling European Union for the palm oil thing.
For a few years now, at least.
Yeah, a few years. Your take, Fifi?
Sure. I mean, Indonesia has been the strongest proponent for ASEAN to remain neutral in a way, so to say. But we also have to keep in mind that it's getting more and more difficult to be neutral with the rising tension between the US and China, and then we're seeing conflicts like the one in Ukraine. It's becoming more and more difficult for countries in Southeast Asia to not pick a side. The pressure is stronger than ever, and it's going to take a lot from ASEAN. We talked about reform, we talked about bettering the structure to respond to conflicts and crises. It's going to take a lot from ASEAN to actually be able to remain or to maintain this neutrality amongst the greater major power rivalry.
In relation to what you said, it's true that Indonesia has been really consistent throughout the decades to hold on to that philosophy of remaining neutral in all conflicts, not taking sides at all. But as you say, the geopolitical landscape is completely different now, and Indonesia and ASEAN subsequently have been criticized for being too neutral in so many things where they're supposed to speak up about issues that need to be resolved, and they have to take sides. Do you think Indonesian neutrality, and in this case ASEAN's neutrality, will actually backfire and hurt us at the end?
Look, I do think that Indonesia's foreign policy doctrine since early on has been bebas aktif, right? So independent and active. Which I think is a doctrine that is still very much relevant and very much fluid and suitable to the changing geopolitical situation. However, there is this tendency to use bebas aktif not as a doctrine to proactively strategize, but use it more as an excuse not to do something, which I think are two completely different things. I mean, bebas aktif does not mean that you abstain from any issues in the world. It means that you should be proactive in being independent and being active in taking part of different crises or conflict and try to manage and resolve some of them. But unfortunately, I think in some of the issues, Indonesia has been criticized as using it as an excuse not to have a decision or not to have a clear policy on some issues.
I think one of the biggest concern, this issue of neutrality, of not taking sides, of using the bebas aktif doctrine to, get away from making hard decisions, is with the South China Sea dispute.
Absolutely.
So, will this be different this time, Fifi?
Oh wow! I don't know to be answered. To be honest, to how to answer that question, because indeed, I mean, South China Sea is a very complex issue. We've been talking about it for almost 3 hours now. I don't see any change in the near future with regards to the South China Sea. Yes, ASEAN and China will continue the process, the code of conduct process. It's going slow. Doesn't mean that it's not in process. But the big question is, what kind of code of conduct are we going to get at the end? Is it just going to be a document that everyone's happy to sign, or is it just going to be a document that good or bad, we just need to have one. So it's
just for the sake
for the sake of having a result. So there's very much this expectation about what the code of conduct would be, and there's also a concern that we might not have the document that we all wish for.
Well, as a matter of fact, with all of these escalating tensions, Fifi and also Mr. Julius, and the ongoing and severely delayed negotiations for the code of conducts, China has blatantly produced a new map that has covered the dominant part of South China Sea, which has irritated a number of countries now. So we don't exactly see goodwill, good intentions on China's part to sort of calm down and let's sit together and see eye to eye on this matter.
Yeah. Is there any point on, making up rules to be obeyed together when one party is just playing with their own
power.
rules? Yeah.
Yes, I do agree with you that China doesn't show a goodwill to show that
we should
negotiation
negotiate,
on code of conduct is still the process.
Yeah.
So it means to refrain from any action which provoke reaction from ASEAN members. So maybe it will be very interesting to look at the summit where the countries like Philippines, Vietnam will raise the concern on the new map of China.
Okay.
Maybe will be very interesting if they do, and then will be interesting to know the response from the Prime Minister of China, which represents Xi Jinping.
I truly agree when you say maybe, Mr. Julius, because Fifi has said earlier that everything is already written. It's been discussed by these previous meetings in the groups. These state leaders, government leaders are just reading them through. So meaning that they're not actually negotiating anything at the summit table.
Yeah.
They're just adopting it, as you said. But on the sidelines, will there be talks about this, Fifi, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's the thing about this multilateral events or frameworks, right? The sideline meetings are as important as the actual...
And they can be impromptu as well.
Exactly.
Happen around the schedule.
That was the big problem during the pandemic, right? When, everything's virtual, you don't have chit-chats during the coffee break or,
everyone was sterile.
Exactly. So I think, and I think that's also one of the strengths that ASEAN has had, at least at the very beginning, we mentioned it, personal relations among the leaders were basically the basis of how ASEAN came about. And the current leaders might not have the same luxury as the previous leaders. They don't have the same personal relations. So these kinds of summits, these kinds of meetings are the only chances they have to actually meet together and have at least try to build a personal relation.
All right.
All right. Interesting insights. Thank you so much, Fifi. Okay, I think we have more live feed coming on from the venue at Jakarta Convention Center, so we can see what's going on in there at the start of the summit. As we saw earlier, at the celebration, everybody was attending, including the spouses of the state leaders and heads of delegates. And now we see just the state leaders, the heads of delegates of ASEAN.
Right. And now the summit will begin, we believe, where heads of delegates and delegates participants in the room are ready to take part.
Now, this is a more traditional setting of an ASEAN summit.
Exactly,
this is
Siska.
what we're familiar with.
Yeah, something that we witnessed head-on at the Labuan Bajo summit and now in Jakarta. Let's take a look.
Sri Baginda,
His Majesty,
Yang Mulia para pemimpin Asia,
Excellencies, ASEAN leaders,
selamat datang di KTT
welcome to the 43rd ASEAN Summit in Jakarta.
Saya ingin menyambut
I would like to welcome
Yang Mulia
His Excellency
Hun Manet,
Perdana
Menteri
the Prime Minister of Cambodia,
serta Yang Mulia
and His Excellency
Sanana
Gusmao,
Perdana Menteri Timor Leste.
the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste.
Selamat bergabung Yang
Welcome,
Mulia di keluarga
Excellencies,
besar ASEAN.
to the big ASEAN family.
Para pemimpin ASEAN yang saya hormati,
Distinguished ASEAN leaders,
semua
we
dari kita
are
menyadari
all aware
besarnya tantangan
of the
dunia saat
magnitude
ini,
of current global
di mana
challenges,
kunci
and
utama untuk menghadapinya
where the main
adalah
key to address them
kesatuan
is
dan
ASEAN's
sentralitas
unity
ASEAN.
and centrality.
Arah ASEAN jelas,
ASEAN's objective is clear,
epicentrum of
to
growth.
become an epicentrum of growth.
Modal ASEAN besar untuk
ASEAN
meraihnya,
has tremendous assets to achieve this
tapi
objective,
ASEAN
but
harus
ASEAN
mampu
must be able
bekerja
to work
lebih keras,
harder,
lebih kompak,
become more solid,
lebih berani,
bolder,
dan lebih gesit.
and more agile.
Selain itu,
Additionally,
ASEAN juga
ASEAN
butuh
also requires
strategi taktis
a
jangka
long-term
panjang
tactical
yang
plan
relevan
that is
dan
relevant
sesuai harapan rakyat,
and in line with the hopes
yang
of the people,
tidak hanya
not
untuk
only
5 tahun ke
for the
depan,
next 5 years,
tapi
but
20 tahun ke
for the
depan
next 20
sampai
years until
2045.
2045.
Dan
And
saya
I
mengapresiasi
appreciate
dukungan
the support
negara anggota ASEAN
of ASEAN
dalam
member states
pembahasan
in the
ASEAN
discussions of the ASEAN Concord
ke-4.
4.
Yang mulia,
Excellencies,
ASEAN sebagai bagian
as a
dari
part of
kawasan
the
Indo-Pasifik
Indo-Pacific region,
juga terus konsisten
is also
bekerja
consistently
keras,
working
baik menggunakan
both
pendekatan
through an
inklusif
inclusive approach,
melalui kerjasama
through
seketar ASEAN
cooperation between
dengan
the ASEAN
Sekretariat
Secretariat
Pasifik
with the PIF
Island Forum,
and
PIF, dan Indian Ocean
Indian Ocean Rim
Association
Association
IORA,
Secretariats,
maupun
IORA,
pendekatan
as
ekonomi
well
dan
as through
pembangunan
the economic
melalui
and development
ASEAN
approach
Indo-Pacific
through the
Forum,
ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum,
sehingga ASEAN bisa
to enable
berdampak
ASEAN
bagi
to bring
rakyatnya
beneficial
dan juga
impacts
bagi
for its
dunia.
people and also for the world.
ASEAN sebagai kapal
ASEAN
besar
as a
memiliki
large
tanggung
ship
jawab yang
also
juga
has a major
besar
responsibility
pada ratusan juta
towards
jiwa
the
rakyat
hundreds of millions
yang
of people
berlayar
who are
bersama di
sailing
dalamnya.
together on it.
Dan
And
walaupun harus
despite
berlayar
having to
di tengah
sail
badai,
through a storm,
kita sebagai
we
para pemimpin
as
ASEAN
ASEAN
harus
leaders
memastikan
must
bahwa
ensure
kapal ini
that
mampu
this
terus
ship
melaju,
can continue to
mampu
sail,
terus
and
berlayar,
that
dan kita harus menjadi
we have
nahkoda
to
di
be
kapal kita sendiri
captains of our own
untuk
ship
mewujudkan
to achieve
perdamaian,
peace,
mewujudkan stabilitas,
to achieve
mewujudkan
stability,
kemakmuran
to
bersama.
achieve prosperity together.
Dan dengan
And
ini
with this,
saya nyatakan
I declare
KTT ke-43
the 43rd
ASEAN
Plenary
sesi
Session
pleno dibuka.
open.
Selanjutnya sebelum
Next,
kita
before
mulai
we
sesi
begin
pleno
the closed
yang
plenary
akan
session,
dilakukan secara tertutup dengan hormat,
I
saya mohon awak
respectfully
media
invite
untuk
media
meninggalkan
personnel
ruangan
to
pertemuan.
vacate the meeting room.
Terima kasih.
Thank you.
It's time for us to exit the meeting room as stated by President Joko Widodo. That's for everyone, including TVR World. But here we are, still on the stage, dissecting, or rather, just discussing on what we hope to achieve from the summit. I'd like to go over to our guest again on the program. For lack of a better word, it was very normative what President has said as opposed to what he has said at the other opening remarks of the entire summit day today. More substances from the first one. For the second one, a lot of mentions of unity, centrality, and a touch a little bit on the Concord 4, Fifi and also Mr. Julius. But more on that, it's all about growing together, achieving, again, in line with the theme, epicentrum of growth and common prosperity. Your analysis of the summit's opening, Fifi first, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, not so much to say. I mean, you're basically right, mostly normative. It's interesting. Well, he didn't mention Indo-Pacific and how it's important for ASEAN to play a bigger role in Indo-Pacific. But what's also interesting is that he mentioned sailing through storm.
Yes.
And that ASEAN is a ship and we are the captain of the ship.
Is he saying the storm brewing at the moment and we need to sail through it like?
I'm not sure, but I think the president was referring to. We talked about the current turmoil with geopolitical tension and everything, and that ASEAN should be ready, to sail through all kinds of storm, facing all the challenges. But again, the big question is how do we do that?
Yes.
Of course we have to sail through the storm, but what kind of ship are we building?
How do we navigate?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we're still using the same ship that we used in 1960s, I'm not sure that ship can sail through the storm of the 2023.
Yeah. It's
So,
a different storm altogether from
exactly.
the 60s.
So again, that's the big question. What kind of storm? Not only do we have to define what kind of storm we are sailing through, but what kind of ship are we captaining?
Okay. Now, that's another interesting note, actually. He used the word, we need to be captains of our own ships. The thing here is the captain of the ASEAN ship changes periodically. So there's a problem in itself, right? When you have captains that are different in each period, then you'll have different way to navigate the ship. And that can also be a problem for the ship at the end. What do you think of this? Should there be like a mechanism so the ship can be navigated through the same routes and mechanisms, although the captain of the ship is different each time?
Sure. I personally don't think that President Joko was literally referring to Indonesia as the chair. I think when he said that we should be captain of of the ship, is that he means that the ASEAN people should be responsible in building this ship all together, for at least represented by the leaders at the summit. They need to figure out a way so that ASEAN as a regional organization can still be relevant, can still play a role, and can still be considered a reliable partner by all of our dialogue partners. So I do think that's the main challenge here. Yes, Indonesia is the current chair of ASEAN, but I think we discussed that, chair of ASEAN is a rotating mechanism, right? So every year we would have a different chair. But if the rotating mechanism functions well, then there should not be a problem. As we see that, if there are no serious crisis or conflict, then, the rotating mechanism has worked well. We see that the different initiatives of ASEAN in the ASEAN Economic Community, for example, has worked well through this mechanism that ASEAN has. The problem comes when there is very specific serious problem like Myanmar, then, it's basically ASEAN has been clueless on what to do.
Right. Okay. Mr. Julius, share with us your thoughts on what President has had to say for the opening of the core summit just moments ago.
Of course, normative. The opening remark is very, very normative, and that's very standard in multilateral fora like this. Avoiding the sensitiveness. Otherwise, you will provoke somebody to speak up loudly suddenly, something like that. But most important, of course, the message, even though it is indeed normative, but there is still the message, hidden message maybe, something like sailing through the storm. Maybe it reflects his worriness about, yes, we hold the wheel, so we know the directions, but the problem is, there might be two wheels, maybe.
Two wheels?
Maybe, or three wheels.
What are you saying, Mr.?
The global player may. Actually, so the interference or the direction, we cannot make up our own directions of the ship.
Are we becoming proxy, as he also said at the other remarks? Is he seeing that? So that's why he needs to emphasize on this not being a proxy thing, rejection of being a proxy.
Yes, that's what I mean actually. Something that he concerns much on the situation. Of course, the storm itself. What does it mean by badai? Something like that. Is there something serious around us? Maybe he's concerned about that. Maybe he knows about the transformation of global geopolitics. Something like more members of BRICS are not joining. We know that. And then we still understand about G7 trying to controlling or playing the architecture of economic in the world. Something like that. Maybe that's the storm that he means. Not only the issue of Myanmar, but also
with everything else that is going on.
Political transformation, I call it.
Okay, it's quite fascinating actually. For the past 3 hours, we've been talking a lot about the geopolitical tension, geopolitical instabilities, all the conflicts and disputes that are going on. Even though at the beginning of Indonesia's chairmanship, I think Ibu Retno has reiterated numerous times that she wants to have economic issues to be the core of Indonesia's chairmanship, to actually put ASEAN as the epicentrum of growth. Do you think this would be possible with all of this tensions going on right now that must be hindering to the main agenda, to having an actual economic growth happening as a region and that is beneficial to all member countries? What do you think, Mbak Fifi?
If the question is it possible, not possible, of course it's possible. The geopolitical challenges occur in all regions of the world. in some worse than others. But I do think that, it doesn't mean that all sorts of cooperation should stop, right? I mean, like, there are clear initiatives at the economic front. I think throughout the year, Indonesia's been putting forth a number of initiatives based on the epicentrum of growth as the theme. Some are, we can see some of the deliverables. Again, referring back to the AMM joint communique back in July, they put a clear list of the key deliverables related to the epicentrum of growth. Some you can see real outcome of, and those are some of the things that I think Indonesia has been quite proud of as achievements in its chairmanship. But on the other hand, yes, you also have to be aware that the clear political security challenges still exist and remain homework for ASEAN.
Right. Ms. Fifi, currently ongoing behind closed doors is the 43rd ASEAN Summit, and later on in the second half of the day, another notable and key summit will take place, which is the, Siska mentioned earlier, the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Summit. And we've been talking back and forth about how sexy it is, the region of Indo-Pacific, and ASEAN centrality will be in the driver's seat to determine the future of the region per se. So, Ms. Fifi, walk us through what are some of the biggest potential that Indo-Pacific has, that it has garnered attentions from, China has asserted influence, and then US is trying to tackle that by embracing the regions and thus through ASEAN.
I do think it's a bit far-fetched if we say that this will be, this means that ASEAN will be decisive in Indo-Pacific and so on. I think the ASEAN,
large of a region for ASEAN to manage.
The ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, and now with the Indo-Pacific Forum, I think it's part of the ways that ASEAN wants to play a role in the Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is basically the main arena for geopolitical tensions, US-China relations and so on. And if you recall, in the past decade, Southeast Asia has mostly been in the spectator arena, right? We're looking at the two giant countries having a conflict, having a tension and so on. So with the ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, the main idea was for ASEAN to at least contribute something. We play a role, we set the tone. We create some sort of norms that we should be taken into account by the whole decision making in the Indo-Pacific. So I think that's what the idea is now, so that ASEAN should not be left behind in this whole theater of Indo-Pacific and geopolitical tension.
Are you sharing the same similar opinions?
The approach, I think, is very important. How ASEAN will build the bridge between, it's like a big continent, something like that. So ASEAN only consists of 10 members, but we talk about the Indo-Pacific then, but larger areas of that. And then what Indonesia has in mind, I think, quite interesting, Ibu Fifi, connecting IORA and also Pacific Island Forum. I think that's starting point, which is simple things to achieve the big dream. Sometime maybe in 100 years maybe. But at least I agree with Ibu Fifi, not just become spectator, but contribute. Maybe little thing, but that's contributions.
Now, one of the expected tangible result of the ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum is the formulation of the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. Maybe you can shed some light on that, Mbak Fifi?
Oh, no, the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific was issued in 2019. What's been the problem is the actual implementation of the Outlook itself. I mean, if you look at the documents, they list at least 3 key areas of cooperation. And, there has been a lot of criticisms as to, you've listed these key areas of cooperation, but then, what's the implementation? Can this actually be put into operations, And I think that's one of the Indo-Pacific Forum that we're having at the summit this year is one of the earlier steps to actually put things into operations, to at least do something that's actionable from from the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific. So basically, the basic document is there. It's a follow-up from there.
And can it be used to handle the issues that we're facing now?
Oh, I don't think it's meant to be used to handle. Yeah,
Okay.
Like I said, it's one of the ways that ASEAN would like to play a role in the Indo-Pacific. If you recall, maybe in 2017, when the word Indo-Pacific was becoming a buzzword, when the U.S. started to use it in their national security strategy, and then they changed their Pacific Command into Indo-Pacific Command. The word Indo-Pacific is seen as to describe a region of competition.
Okay.
So the ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific tried to shift that from a region of competition to a region of cooperation. So that's why if you go through the document, you see this areas of cooperation, how important it is to cooperate for the states in Indo-Pacific. Of course, it's very idealistic. So that's why I said the criticism has been how to actually implement some of the points there. And I think the meeting in the summit today should be part of how to implement that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I'd like to go over again to Mr. Julius at the end of our conversation table. There are two major players here in the region, Mr. Julius. One is the U.S. with its U.S. Indo-Pacific strategies, and another China with its Belt and Road initiatives. And where does ASEAN with its ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific come in between these two competing, I don't know, agents?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what Pak Jokowi would like to send a message. The big waves come from first in United States and then also from China, which it has different interests, but the interest is conflictual or conflicting or competing. Well, where is ASEAN? The position of ASEAN? It's not easy actually. I have to say that. Being in the driving seat means shaping the direction, shaping the agenda to achieve the direction or achieve the goal. And I'm not sure, maybe I'm a bit skeptical about the competence of ASEAN. But at least gaining the benefit from the rivalry between the two big powers should be in the agenda, in the priority agenda.
Right. We should have to see how it unfolds, Siska.
I know. I think the general sentiment so far has been a tad pessimistic, but still hopeful. Would you agree, Mbak Fifi? Are you still hopeful for good results at the 43rd ASEAN Summit?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
To have our conversation.
I don't want to spoil the fun, but let me just emphasize again that there's quite a lot of homework for ASEAN.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those who really doesn't want to put all the responsibilities towards the chair, whether you like it or not. Okay, Indonesia is the chair, but ASEAN is an association of 10 member countries.
It's a collective.
Pak Jokowi talked about keluarga, right?
Yeah.
It's a family, so which means that the responsibility is there. There is so much that a chair can do. Indonesia can put a lot of initiatives on the table, but without the support and the hard work from the other member states, is exactly what's going on now. Whatever initiatives is put on the table, it's slowed down by the tough bureaucracy of ASEAN, the lack of decision making agility. So whatever initiatives that the chair, be it Indonesia or other chairs, put on the table, it's going to be there for a long time before any implementation could be made.
Right. Lastly, Mr. Julius, your hope and expectation for ASEAN Summit Day 1?
Well, I sent Indonesia already good chair.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the question is, after this, what? How Indonesia can ensure the decision to be made within the first day will be implemented. There's something. About the process, I think we can manage well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we can only wish the best of luck to Laos after this. And that puts a cap, as Siska said, to the end of our first belt of today's programs as we cover the entire day of the 43rd ASEAN Summit and its associated summits here in Jakarta, Indonesia. Finally, I'm Rahmat Idris.
I'm Siska Becker. Do stay tuned to TV Our World because our coverage continues for the whole day in an hour. So we'll be back actually for the journal.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. But for now, thank you for watching and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.